All of Europe begins to tremble. Winter is coming, but the question is, does Europe have gas? When Russian President Vladimir Putin turned off the gas tap, it wasn't just an energy crisis.
Kevin O'Leary is sounding the alarm, warning that this isn't a temporary crisis. This is the beginning of a new dark age for Europe, a systematic unraveling of decades of industrial might, prosperity, and geopolitical influence. For years, Europe prided itself on being a global powerhouse, a beacon of industry, innovation, and progress. Yet here we are, watching that very power slip through the continent's fingers. The decision to phase out Russian gas, announced with pomp in Brussels, is not triumph. It is capitulation. The acknowledgement of a truth Europe has been avoiding. Putin has already won this battle. Let's be clear, this is not speculation. Industrial output is collapsing. Germany's manufacturing indices are deep in contraction territory. Factories that once hummed with life now sit idle, silent, suffocating under the weight of skyrocketing energy costs. Aluminum smelters, steel mills, fertilizer plants, the backbone of Europe's industrial empire, are shutting down one by one. The numbers are catastrophic. Gas demand is down, production is down, and with it, Europe's share of the global economic pie. From 25% in 1990 to barely 14% today, the decline is undeniable. And yet European leaders speak as if all is well. Clean energy transitions, net zero plans, ambitious deals, all fancy words on paper while the industrial base crumbles beneath them. The real story? Energy is sovereignty. Without control over energy flows, Europe cannot compete. It cannot manufacture. It cannot innovate at scale. Putin understood this. Europe ignored it, and now the consequences are in plain sight. The cruel irony is that Europe is now pretending this was its choice. It was not. Russia already cut the tap. Now Brussels formalizes its own defeat. LG imports from America or Qatar. Expensive, unreliable, and competing with Asia for every cargo. Europe traded one dependency for another. More costly, more precarious, and still under the shadow of Moscow's power. Kevin O'Leary warns this is not just an energy crisis. It is a civilizational test. Europe's industrial civilization is unraveling, and with it, its global influence. The Dark Age isn't a metaphor. It's unfolding in real time, factory by factory, job by job, policy by policy. And Putin, he's watching quietly, while Europe celebrates what is, in reality, its strategic surrender. Putin's gas cut was never about money, Johnny. Deliberate power play. Meticulously designed to show Europe who controls the levers of energy, and therefore global influence. Europe, for decades, outsourced nearly 45% of its natural gas to Russia. Industrial heartlands, factories, and entire economies were left vulnerable, dependent on Moscow's decisions. And then, Putin flipped the switch. By systematically reducing gas flows, even before the Ukraine invasion, Russia demonstrated a brutal reality. Energy is sovereignty. Pipelines like Yamal and Nord Stream 2 were not mere infrastructure. They were instruments of geopolitical dominance. The reductions weren't accidental or market-driven. They were strategic, calculated, and timed to maximize Europe's vulnerability. Kevin O'Leary warns that this is the kind of move that doesn't just create temporary economic disruptions. It shapes the fate of nations. Industrial production slows, factories close, exports decline, and the global power balance shifts. Europe, dependent on cheap Russian energy, had no alternative ready. Even LNG imports from America or Qatar, though technically possible, are expensive and unreliable. The continent learned the hard way that relying on a single foreign energy source is not just risky, it's catastrophic. Putin's strategy succeeded spectacularly. Europe now faces deindustrialization, economic contraction, and diminished global influence, all consequences of a manipulated energy dependency. This is more than a crisis. It's a lesson in power, preparation, and strategic foresight. Europe thought it could survive without energy sovereignty. Russia proved otherwise. Europe isn't collapsing with headlines or street protests. No, Johnny, it's a silent industrial implosion, unfolding factory by factory, city by city. Putin's gas cut didn't just create a supply problem. It triggered an unprecedented economic meltdown. Factories that once powered the continent now sit idle. Germany, the industrial heart of Europe, has seen its manufacturing indices trapped in contraction territory. Aluminum smelters, steel mills, chemical plants, and fertilizer factories are shutting down under skyrocketing energy costs. The consequences? Devastating. Europe's share of global GDP has fallen from 25% in 1990 to just 14% today. Industrial output, once the envy of the world, is crumbling. Skilled workers are losing jobs. Entire supply chains are disrupted. And this isn't temporary adjustment. This is structural collapse. Every factory that closes is a blow to Europe's economic sovereignty, a reminder that the continent is no longer in control of its destiny. Kevin O'Leary warns that the European Union's decisions, cloaked in green transition and energy independence, are band-aids over a hemorrhaging industrial base. The phase-out of Russian gas by 2027 is not a victory, it's codifying a defeat already imposed by Moscow. Europe's alternatives, LNG imports from America and Qatar, are expensive, unreliable, and insufficient to restore lost production. This silent collapse is reshaping the global balance of power. As Europe contracts, the US and China seize the opportunity to expand their industrial and technological dominance. The continent that once set global standards for manufacturing, innovation, and prosperity is quietly losing its seat at the table of global decision-making. And the tragedy? Europe's leaders celebrate this as progress, while the factories close and the people pay the price. Energy isn't just a commodity, it is got sovereignty itself. Johnny, जो control करता है energy flows, वो control करता है nations. Europe outsourced this sovereignty decades ago, relying on Russia for nearly half its natural gas. The result? A continent that once dictated industrial standards is now at the mercy of Moscow's whims. Putin understood this profoundly. By controlling Europe's energy supply, he didn't just influence prices, he controlled the very heartbeat of European industry. Wow. Kevin O'Leary repeatedly warns that energy independence isn't optional. It's a prerequisite for survival in the 21st century. Without secure, affordable energy, you cannot manufacture, innovate, or maintain global influence. Europe's dependence on Russian pipelines wasn't a minor oversight. It was strategic vulnerability. Factories, high-tech industries, steel mills, chemical plants, all are powerless when energy flows are cut. And let's be clear, Janny, this isn't about short-term shortages. This is long-term structural weakness. Even as Brussels announces plans to phase out Russian gas, the continent remains at the mercy of costly LNG imports from America and Qatar, competing with Asia for every shipment, expensive, unreliable, and politically entangled. Europe traded one master for another. Sovereignty was promised, dependency was delivered. Energy sovereignty also dictates economic and geopolitical power. Countries with secure energy control their own destiny. Those without it, they collapse silently, losing industry, jobs, and influence. Europe's industrial contraction, declining GDP, and fading global role are all symptoms of lost sovereignty. Putin didn't just cut gas, he cut the control that Europe thought it had. And Kevin O'Leary warns, until Europe learns this fundamental truth, the continent will remain vulnerable, exposed, and incapable of reclaiming its lost power. Putin's gas cut didn't just halt pipelines, it triggered a domino effect that is systematically dismantling Europe's industrial backbone. When energy prices explode, every energy-intensive industry feels the impact immediately. Aluminum smelters can't operate, steel mills shut down, fertilizer factories idle, and chemical plants grind to a halt. These aren't isolated events. Each closure ripples across supply chains, causing job losses, export declines, and cascading economic contraction. Kevin O'Leary warns that this is a textbook example of interconnected vulnerability. Europe's industrial ecosystem was built on efficiency and energy predictability. Disrupt that supply and the entire system falters. Germany, once the engine of European manufacturing, has seen industrial gas consumption drop drastically. Factories that fueled global exports are now silent, while workers face layoffs and shrinking opportunities. This isn't a temporary slowdown, it's structural, long-term deindustrialization. The consequences extend beyond economics. When factories close, innovation stalls. Europe loses its competitive edge in advanced manufacturing and high-tech industries. Smaller nations reliant on German machinery and supply chains face knock-on effects, deepening the continental crisis. Even the so-called replacement energy sources like LNG from the US or Qatar are insufficient to fully restart these industries due to cost, logistics, and global competition. The domino effect is also geopolitical. As Europe falters, power shifts to America and China, which continue to expand their industrial and technological dominance. Europe debates regulations and net zero policies while watching its productive capacity shrink. The chain reaction set off by Putin's gas cut is proving that energy control is power control. And losing it initiates consequences that extend far beyond factories to jobs, innovation, and global influence. Europe's leaders have chosen to celebrate delusion over reality. While factories shut and jobs vanish, politicians talk about green transitions and net zero industries, as if fancy phrases could replace energy sovereignty. Kevin O'Leary repeatedly warns that these policies, however well-intentioned on paper, are band-aids on a hemorrhaging economy. They cannot halt the industrial collapse or restore Europe's competitive edge in the global market. The irony is staggering. Europe's dependency on Russian gas, the very source of its vulnerability, was masked by lofty promises of sustainability. Leaders framed energy decisions as moral choices, when in reality, they ignored the practical consequences. Pipeline cuts, LNG imports, and skyrocketing energy costs have exposed the continent's reliance on external powers. Instead of proactive industrial defense, Brussels and national governments crafted elaborate climate programs that provide optics but fail to address the core problem: affordable, secure energy. Walked. Kevin O'Leary emphasizes that this isn't a minor miscalculation. It's a strategic failure. Europe's energy-intensive industries, steel, aluminum, chemicals, and fertilizers, are collapsing because policy fantasies were prioritized over practical resilience. Replacing Russian gas with expensive LNG imports from the US or Qatar doesn't solve the problem. It's politically acceptable but economically disastrous, leaving Europe trapped in dependency at higher costs. The result? Europe continues to deindustrialize silently, while celebrating policy achievements. Ambitious green projects are being lauded in boardrooms and Brussels press releases, but the factories remain silent, workers remain unemployed, and global competitiveness erodes. The continent is caught in a delusional narrative that progress is being made, even as the structural decay of industry accelerates. In short, political fantasy cannot substitute for energy sovereignty and industrial power. Until Europe confronts reality, its decline will continue, quietly reshaping global power in favor of those nations that control both energy and production. Europe's collapse isn't just economic, it's geopolitical. As factories close, energy costs soar, and industrial output falls, the continent is quietly losing its seat at the table of global power. Kevin O'Leary repeatedly emphasizes that when a region loses control over its energy and industrial base, it loses influence over the future of nations. Europe's decline is creating a vacuum, one that is rapidly being filled by the United States and China. The shift is clear. America is innovating in AI, technology, and industrial automation, while China expands its Belt and Road projects, investing heavily in infrastructure, energy, and manufacturing worldwide. Meanwhile, Europe debates regulations, drafts directives, and celebrates green policies, all while watching its productive capacity shrink. The continent that once set global industrial standards is now reacting to crises rather than leading solutions. This isn't hypothetical. The numbers speak for themselves. Germany's industrial gas usage is collapsing, factories are shutting down, and GDP share is declining. Job losses are mounting, exports are falling, and the next generation of engineers, scientists, and industrial leaders faces diminished opportunities. Europe's soft power, its ability to influence international policy and economic norms, is eroding alongside its industrial base. Kevin O'Leary warns that this is a long-term realignment. Energy sovereignty and industrial strength are the foundation of global influence. Without them, Europe cannot dictate trade, technology, or geopolitical strategy. Russia demonstrated the power of controlling energy, and Europe's failure has left it dependent, weakened, and increasingly irrelevant on the world stage. The global power balance is shifting east and west, and while Europe becomes a silent spectator to its own decline. The lesson is brutal but simple. Without energy and industrial independence, Europe cannot compete. Without control, influence fades. And while the continent mourns its past, the world moves forward. Europe's announcement to phase out Russian gas by 2027 is being portrayed as strategy, vision, and independence. But the reality is far more sobering. Kevin O'Leary warns that this is not a choice at all. It is codified defeat. The pipelines have already been shut, factories have already slowed, and the industrial heartbeat of the continent has already faltered. What Brussels calls policy is merely the acknowledgement of a situation Moscow created years ago. The illusion of choice masks a deeper truth. Europe is still dependent, vulnerable, and exposed. Replacement energy sources, LNG from the United States, Qatar, or elsewhere, are expensive, logistically complex, and subject to global market volatility. Europe now competes with Asia for every shipment, often paying 2 to 4 times more than pre-crisis prices. In effect, the continent has traded one dependency for another, more costly and unpredictable. The supposed freedom to choose energy sources is a false narrative, one that conceals economic fragility behind a veil of political optics. This illusion has consequences that extend far beyond energy bills. Factories cannot operate reliably, jobs are lost, exports decline, and Europe's influence on global markets diminishes. Industrial relocation to Asia and America accelerates, and innovation stagnates under the weight of high costs and energy insecurity. Kevin O'Leary emphasizes that sovereignty isn't granted by clever speeches or announcements. It is secured through control of essential resources. Putin's strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. By controlling energy, he removed Europe's ability to independently power its economy. The continent's leaders may speak of transition and independence, but the truth is unavoidable. The choice was never theirs. Europe now faces the long-term consequences of surrender disguised as strategy, learning too late that your energy dependency is the ultimate form of subjugation.